Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar for today, Mass Incarceration, the Rural Perspective. We're really excited to talk about this important topic and to have you all here with us, so thank you for joining. We're going to go over a few logistics to get started. So at any point during the webinar, if you have technological issues or want to send me, the host, a note, if you look in the top right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, you should see a blue little chat-looking bubble. That's the chat feature, and you can send me a note through that feature. If for some reason that fails, you can always send me an email at my email address, bbarge@ncrp.org. It's in order to ask a question to the presenters during our Q&A portions today. You can submit a question through the Q&A icon. It's a blue question mark button you can also see in the top right portion of your WebEx screen. So when we prompt you later in the webinar, that is the button you will use to send your questions. And last but not least, this webinar is being recorded today. So within a few days of the webinar, you'll be able to find a recording of this webinar on our events page on our website, as well as through our YouTube channel. And just some quick upcoming events. Our Impact Awards will be later this spring, and every year we honor foundations who are doing an amazing job supporting important social justice work. And we rely on folks out there in the field from you all to nominate foundations to select. So you can do that through our website at ncrp.org. If you're a nonprofit member of NCRP, we'll be having an orientation to go over new benefits at the end of January, so make sure to sign up for that. We'll also be releasing our latest issue of our quarterly journal, Response to Philanthropy, this time on civic engagement in early February, so keep an eye out for that. And we'll be hosting an exciting public debate at the end of February, we'll ask the question, what priorities should U.S. grant makers be taking right now to best help refugees? That will be a free public event at the View Charitable Trust, and will also be streamed live. So more information will be coming about that soon. And so we'll go ahead and get started, but those are just some things that we have on our calendar coming up. During the course of the webinar today, we invite you to engage with us and your peers on social media. The hashtag for today is Rural Justice, as well as the NCRP chat hashtag we use for all of our webinars. And here are a few of the Twitter handles that you can use today. You'll see these peppered throughout the presentation, so no worries, but these are the handles for us, as well as for our panelists today. We're really, really excited for the conversation today, and we are privileged to have these amazing leaders with us. First, we'll be hearing from Lenny Foster, who is the Director and Spiritual Advisor of the Navajo Nation's Corrections Project. We'll also be hearing from Rev Kenneth Glasgow, who is the Executive Director of the Ordinary People Society and the co-chairman of the formerly incarcerated and convicted people's movement. We'll also be hearing from Szuberla, who is the Executive Director and co-founder of Working Narratives and Nation Inside. And we'll also be hearing from Asha Banfield, who is the Director of Grants, Partnerships, and Special Projects at the Drug Policy Alliance. And of course, moderating today will be Niki, Jagpal, our Director of Research and Policy here at NCRP. We'll actually be skipping the polls for now, so we'll go ahead and delve into some background context, and I'll give it over to Niki.
Thank you, Ben. Excuse me. It really is a privilege to have such a fantastic panel to talk about an issue that is clearly very important to us at this current moment in philanthropy. Our last issue of our quarterly issue focused on criminal justice, and prior to that, we did a special issue of that, which was on implicit bias. And long before that, in 2004, we actually did talk about and write two separate reports in 2004, the first one being Beyond City Limits, the Philanthropic Needs of Rural America, and then the second being Rural Philanthropy, Building Dialogue from Within, which was revised and published again on August 2007. Both of these touched on resource deficiencies, lack of CBOs, community-based organizations, lack of access to capital, to the philanthropic capital markets, and a lack of, in addition to a resource deficiency, there is a huge knowledge gap about what the real needs of people on the ground who are living in the south of this country and in rural areas in particular, that there are huge disparities. And as you all, I'm sure, know, everything in our ecosystem is interconnected. And so I brought up the prior issue of implicit bias because that clearly plays a role here as well. And so I'd like to take this moment just to talk about it as a strategy, an organizing tool, and philanthropy, and how we can help incarcerated and formerly incarcerated folks, particularly those from underserved communities, and for the purposes of our webinar, of rural populations. So a question to keep in mind that would sort of frame this would be, where does rural fit from both a strategic perspective and also from a values perspective? And now I would like to introduce our first panelist. Our first panelist has an incredible background, which I highly recommend everybody read through, in fact, for all four of our guests. Our first presenter will be Mr. Lenny Foster, who early on in his career recognized the importance of traditional Native American religious practice as a source of strength and as a necessary means of cultural preservation. He has spent decades fighting to ensure that incarcerated Native Americans have the right to worship with access to their traditional ceremonies. Today, as the spiritual advisor and director of the Navajo Nation's Corrections Project, he is overseeing the traditional spiritual guidance of 1,500 inmates in 89 state and federal penitentiaries. And in his own words, he is extremely troubled by the high rate of suicide among Native American prisoners, particularly juveniles. And with that, welcome, Lenny.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm pleased and honored to be part of this distinguished panel to share our experience. As mentioned, I feel that spirituality and religious and cultural practice is very important for our Native prisoners, inmates who are incarcerated in state prisons and federal penitentiaries. 96 I visited at last count, and I have over 2,000 patients and clients that I visit in death row, administrative segregation, general population. And as mentioned, the sweat lodge ceremonies is a backbone of our direct services. It's been the most positive therapy for those individuals who are locked up for years, and it provides an input or contact with the outside spiritual leaders such as myself. Pipe ceremonies are also very important for our people who are in death row, administrative segregation, and again, the general population. Talking circles are important. And just advocating for religious rights, First Amendment protection, freedom of worship, if there's such a thing, because we had to fight for that. We had to advocate for that as Native Americans. And security concerns, homeland security, they're all reasons for denying these activities, these rights. So we had to constantly advocate, lobby, and fight for these rights. So I'm pleased and honored to be part of your distinguished panel. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And next, I would like to introduce, I'm sorry. One second, we are having a minor issue here. Got it worked out. Thank you. So you have a long history of advocacy around the impact of the criminal justice system on the sovereignty and well-being of American Indian peoples, including those living in rural areas. How have you seen advocacy, pardon me, around these issues evolve?
I've been working on these issues and problems for over 35 years, and I've seen the resistance from the administration, the prison officials, the Federal Bureau of Prisons. There's a lot of racism, discrimination, prejudice towards Native American beliefs, and we have to continually educate these individuals, including the wardens and the chaplains, and most specifically the correctional officers, the guards. They make racist remarks such as, they speak a language we do not understand, we do not know what they are saying, we wish they would speak English, and they make remarks such as, we wish that they wouldn't beat on the drum and sing because it riles them up. And so I have to deal with that each time I visit a facility to educate. So it's a real education process to improve the awareness or consciousness of the United States prison system. And I sometimes feel that I'm an adversary to obtain our freedom of worship. One does not forfeit his thinking, his language, his songs and prayers just because they enter the prison system. And it's cruel and unusual punishment as far as I'm concerned. And we do not want to be Native Americans, the first Americans, the original Americans do not want to be equated with the Muslims and Islamic. They try to lump us into one category, but we should not be in a category.
Right.
Categorized.
I'm wondering if you could speak a little about what some of the most effective strategies that you've used to accomplish all of the things that you have, a little bit more, and expound on that.
I've had 3 experiences that I think were very significant. One, of course, is litigation, lawsuits, to obtain these rights, and that's a very lengthy process. Early on, we had the support and backing of the Native American Rights Fund out of Boulder, Colorado, and we had attorneys who we worked with that would take on our cases and take it into state and federal courts. And we were successful in the late 70s, early 80s. But that all changed. So the next experience is legislation. I had to find a state legislature, senator, federal legislature to submit or take our concerns, put it into legislative language, and introduce a bill that would be heard by the respective committees. I myself had testified many times in the state capitol in Phoenix, Santa Fe, New Mexico, Denver, Colorado, Salt Lake City, Sacramento, California, and also on 2 occasions in Washington, D.C. before Congress. And also I've taken these concerns, these issues, these experiences into the international arena, the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. I've testified on occasions of these problems. And then the third experience that we find that educates, creates some awareness is just legislation, asking the warden, the directors, the administrators of the state and federal prisons to sit down at the table and let's discuss these concerns, let's discuss these issues, and work towards resolution where we can have our input into these policies that govern the practices and the rights of our Native Americans. So these three experiences have been very successful, and we continue to lobby or advocate for the compliance and the enforcement of the policies, the statutes, and the laws that are created as a result. And it's a continuous activity. I myself just recently testified in federal court in Phoenix, Arizona over the use of the water drum. Water drum is an ancient ceremonial practice where singing, praying in the sweat lodge and using the water drum. And the correctional officers, the chaplains were saying that was a security concern. And we see that it isn't, so we had to go into court and testify to that, and we prevailed. The federal court ruled in favor of the Native Americans' right to sing and use the water drum. So that's an example. And we, of course, had to go into court and file lawsuits to have access and use of the sweat lodge, spiritual leaders coming into the facilities to teach and to lead the ceremonies, and even having long hair had become an issue at one time. And
right.
So these concerns affecting Native American cultural practices, Native American spiritual beliefs have all been tested one way or another. And security is always used as a reason by the officials that our way of life is a security threat, a security concern. So
right.
we have to
on a related note, and thank you for sharing those examples, I'm wondering if you could talk a little about how the criminal justice system affects the sovereignty and well-being of Native communities, specifically the sovereignty.
Well, sovereignty is a way of life that we feel we've always had, that was granted to us by the Creator. It was not a man-made law. It was not given to us by the white man. So we stand on that belief. But, you know, the administration, whether they're state officials, the governor, or the federal officials, they don't view it or look at it as that. And sovereignty is a way of life for our people. We say we were granted that right to be a human being, to be a Native American, American Indian, indigenous person by the Creator. He made us with our beliefs and our land and our way of life.
Right.
So that's how we view sovereign. We feel that our Indian nations are sovereign entities, and the state governments and the federal government have to deal with our respective tribal governments as sovereign entities. So
right.
It's a real test in compliance and enforcement of our treaty rights. That's what makes us sovereign, because our ancestors signed agreements, contracts, treaties with the encroaching white people. And those treaties are still alive today. The World Court and the United Nations recognizes these treaties as a living document. So we have to remind state legislatures, the governor, the federal, even President Obama has been informed that we are sovereign. We are sovereign nations. We feel that we have to stand on those rights guaranteed through treaties.
Thank you so much. And now I would like to introduce our second panelist. Our second panelist is Szuberla. Nick has helped design and lead national public information campaigns on issues ranging from sentencing reform to U.S. energy policy. He founded Holler to the Hood, which is a multimedia project exploring urban and rural relationships, Thousands Kites, which is a national dialogue project addressing the U.S. criminal justice system, as well as Calls from Home, which is an interactive radio and organizing project. One of the things that he has trained innumerable number of folks in is how to use low-cost media as an organizing tool. And with that, I will turn it over to Nick.
Thank you very much. Two stories. The first, Lily Branch Kennedy in the late 90s moved her son and her family from New York down to Virginia because she felt like it would just be a better place to raise her family. And as her story unfolds, a knock comes to the door, and the police say, "Hey, we're looking for your son here in Richmond, Virginia, and we think that he's committed an armed robbery." And really is shocked, and as her son is brought into the justice system, the one thing they don't know is that the state of Virginia in the year before had actually abolished parole in the state. And so as her son is charged and he's found guilty at the sentencing, the judge for a nonviolent crime sentences him to 115 years. And Lily, when she tells this story, says she misheard. She thought he must have said 115 months, or did he say 115 days? But her son heard clearly, and he turns around and he says, "Mom, you should just go ahead and give up on me." And as he weaves his way through the system, Marcus eventually ends up at a rural prison in Southwest Virginia called Red Onion, which was a supermax facility in which people spent 23 hours a day in lockdown, that the use of taser belts at the time were used regularly, and that the prison was manned by mostly folks from Southwest Virginia, predominantly white, so there's a kind of big cultural isolation. The closest airport to that prison was about 3 hours away. The closest bus station was 2.5 hours away. And here we find Lily's son. At the same time, Edith and her son James are living in Southwest Virginia. And at that time, her son was working as a coal miner, and he had gotten injured by some bad top, some bad coal, some rock that hit him and injured him. And he developed a prescription drug abuse addiction to OxyContin. And it's not an accident that he came in contact with OxyContin, because at the time, Purdue Pharmacy had identified a pain belt throughout America, going kind of from Maine all the way down to Alabama, where people work in timber, coal, gas, and small manufacturing, and who are prone to industrial accidents, workplace accidents. And they had been actively pushing a highly addictive drug, OxyContin, which soon started to flood the jails of rural communities in those regions. And her son received a 20-year sentence. So very, very harsh sentences developed kind of at this policy level. For me at that time, and he also ends up in Red Onion State Prison. I was living a few miles away from Red Onion, and I was working at a community radio station, WMT, on a community radio. Voice of the Mountain People, awesome radio to our friends. And you can imagine Southwest Virginia, Kentucky, West Virginia, it is a sea of bluegrass, country music. That's what's on the radio. And, as a young guy at the time, I was into hip-hop music, and I began to do a late-night hip-hop show. And prisoners began writing letters to us describing human rights abuse. And so we came to sort of what is happening. We both see that there's a drug epidemic where our jails are full and people are watching their neighbors go into prison. And at the same time, our region had built up prisons as a form of economic development. So the decision had been made years before that we would heavily recruit prisons, and those were the radio listeners who were writing the letters. Folks shipped in, women from Hawaii, men from the Virgin Islands, men from New Mexico, D.C. residents were being shipped into these state, federal, and private prisons that were shoring up our local economy. I think one question that we're being asked here is to look at both how do rural and urban connect in this issue. And I can tell you that today, 15 years later, we are in Richmond, Virginia, working with Lily, working with Edith on parole reform. We were able to bring folks together. We were able to bring folks from rural communities together with urban communities to do organizing. And the way we did that was through using a cultural organizing model. So very early on, we felt that urban and rural were being kind of pitted against each other. Like, hey, rural communities have gotten prisons to shore up their crashing economy because they lack political power. No one would want their community to be a prison town, but they don't have the political power to fend this off or to have better solutions made. Urban communities are being targeted because of racism for high rates of incarceration in their community. They're being shipped. So how can we do it together? The first, as artists, as media activists, we said, why don't we create a new music genre called hill hop? And so we brought together some banjo players and hip-hop artists and actually started to delve into that. We used radio to start a weekly radio show that both broadcast to our very rural area the voices of folks who had been shipped in. We called that Calls from Home, and it's a weekly show. It's still going now, 15, 16 years strong. And then we started to fight campaigns. And one of the first campaigns we started to do is anywhere someone had been shipped from. People have been shipped from Connecticut. People have been shipped from the Virgin Islands or New Mexico. Let's fight on getting them at least returned to their home community, because we know if they're in their home community, there's family visits. And we know if there's family visits, there's accountability and that the abuse goes down and that organizing can happen. And so we were actually successful in winning those campaigns. And for us, out of that work, became a national network of grassroots folks, urban and rural. And we said, wow, we have about 20,000 people who have taken part in our database in this work. What do we want to do together? And that's what we formed the Nation Inside project, which provides folks tools, networking, communication capacity to organize around. I think maybe the final thing I'll say is that there's some lessons I can share from working in rural communities. One is that organizing has to happen early. You can't come to rural areas when the day you need the legislation passed. So it's that the infrastructure, we need to go to rural areas early for political organizing. Two, as I mentioned earlier, rural areas lack political power. It is strategic to link to brothers and sisters in urban areas on issues of poverty, on issues of oppression that link the two communities. Rural political power is lacking mostly because of lack of population density. I would also say that when we bring rural and urban communities together to organize, it's powerful, but it's also extremely strategic. And so as we've taken on some national campaigns, like we took on the cost of prison phone calls, one of the things that the folks making the decision on that asked us is prove to us that this is bipartisan. And we said, no problem. Prove to us that this goes across party lines. And no problem. We had already built a base that covers the political spectrum. Now, there's a kind of a movement of where people are bringing folks together inside the Beltway on across party lines. I think in some ways that misses the mark. I think we have to look at, if you're not actually organizing with the base of low-income white community, and rural, not just white, but that's where there's an organizing opportunity. So we think it's very important not to skip that. And finally, as echoed in the beginning, those that are directly impacted, formerly incarcerated people, the family members like Lily and Edith should be the folks who really lead this work. And then finally, the question is asked, where have we received funding? Initially, a lot of our funding was very project-oriented, and it came from the arts sector, arts and justice funding. And then we've been, as we kind of grew, we were able to make the case for kind of your more traditional community organizing and social justice work. But I feel like the urban-rural and the base building, we found kind of progressive funders and certainly arts and justice support.
Great. Thank you so much. And that reminds me that we actually did a report here at NCRP called Fusing Arts and Culture for Social Change. I believe that is that's one of the resources that if we don't have listed, I would suggest that folks look into and is a nice tie. I'd like to go into some question and answer time with you and Lenny. So it seems that you have both.
Just a quick reminder, everybody, we'd like you to submit your questions to ask Lenny and Nick. So in the top right corner, you see the Q&A button. Enter in your questions there, and we'll share those with our panelists as well.
Thanks, Ben. So your experiences with foundations have been quite different, and I'm wondering if you could speak to how foundations have supported your work and how they could be more supportive of the work that you do.
I'd like to answer that.
Sure.
The Navajo Nation Corrections Project do not receive any foundation funding because we operate through the tribal government, and the funding that we receive for our work comes through the Indian Health Service, which are called 638 grants, and that's direct funding from the government to the Navajo Nation, and it's funneled through the Behavioral Health, Department of Behavioral Health, whereby we submit our proposal of how these monies would be used, and the majority of the funding is used for travel to these different facilities in Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and on occasions we'll visit, I have visited facilities in California, Pennsylvania, Kansas, and Florida, where the federal facilities where our natives are incarcerated. So the funding is used in a very prudent manner. We have to schedule these visits far in advance, so we don't just indiscriminately use these monies for travel. We try to make it cost effective and look at the issues that are present itself. Majority of the concerns from the inmates are they would like a spiritual leader to come into the facility, conduct the ceremonies, and provide instructions and teaching. So that's an example of how the funding is utilized, but there's no funding from any foundations. So perhaps at some point we can entertain that. Thank you.
So with Nation Inside, I mean, early on, like in the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of our funding was for like almost art projects or cultural projects, and that came from some regional funders like the Kentucky Foundation for Women, the Appalachian Community Fund, groups like that. As we grew, where we actually kind of became a codified, we're a network, there's 250,000 people in it. We found progressive funders like the David Rockefeller Foundation, Women Donors Network, who we went to and said, we don't have staff and we need someone to help facilitate our network, and they actually put a donor circle together so that we could have a director of that work from Amirza, who we were able to bring in. We have some base funding from the Nathan Cummings Foundation that's cyclical. At one point, I put the suit on, went to New York City, and stood outside the Ford Foundation for about a year, and was able to twist an arm, find an arm to twist, willing to be twisted, that actually gave us a fairly substantial grant. It was a one-off. It was like, we're going to give this to you once to build the communication capacity, the actual architecture for our network that provides all our campaigns support. So it's like we try as a rural area, as a southern-based organization, finding groups to partner with, Media Action Grassroots Network, kind of networks that we can be part of that are securing funding that they then move us from funding. And then we have an individual donor base that drives us forward. But we're a mom and pop kitchen table kind of operation, but funding has been strategic. I'd say mostly it's issue oriented and campaign oriented. So when we kind of say we're doing these issue campaigns, which it makes it a little hard to build organizations, but we stay light on that.
Right. Thank you both. I'm curious about what some of the barriers you find when you bring together urban and rural people, and how you manage those relationships.
Well, go ahead, sir.
I find it's always an educational process, creating awareness with the audience or the administration or administrators at those facilities. It's a real exercise in religious practices and beliefs of Native Americans 101. I find that frustrating sometimes because we constantly have a turnover in administration. Every time you have a new, let me use the example of the Department of Corrections. Every time you have a new warden, a new administration, the officials in the Department of Corrections changes, director and some of the head people, including even the representatives of the chaplains' offices. So we constantly have to create an awareness and new correctional officials, and it's very time-consuming.
Right.
We need to constantly entertain that. I find that that happens every few years, and it's just something that we've accepted, that the awareness of the people in the United States towards Native Americans, the first Americans, the original Americans, of practices, beliefs, is set back in the 1800s, and they take a lot of their information from John Wayne movies and things like that. Those are just examples. So, we have to have a place at the table and input into all of this, these activities, whether it's policy development, whether it's even the funding. One more example, I've recommended that the state officials hire Native Americans as counselors, and or even within the chaplain department, a chaplain, have our Native Americans hired as chaplains. So that hasn't really materialized or developed, but that's one of our recommendations. input into the policy development is very important for Native Americans. Like I said, we have over 2,000 young natives that are incarcerated, men and women, and that voice needs to be brought to the table.
Absolutely.
It's our responsibility and duty to do that, and I have been attempting to do that, and I have a coworker who works with me. His name is Louis Barton, and he's a very excellent spiritual leader, and he's a teacher, and he's a practitioner. So we utilize him as much as we can, along with myself, so that's how we have this input into the ceremonial practices at the state and federal facilities. Just an example. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything you would like to add, Nick?
Sure. I mean, I guess we always start with a story circle process to ground our work, where we're both actively sharing and listening to each other. Kind of an off-the-cuff way I think of it in my own mind is, at the end of the day, rural, urban, we all eat cornbread and beans just in our different forms. And so we can find some shared connection there in looking at our shared struggle and culture. We bring folks together every year for a network gathering. And when we have skipped the part of taking the time to listen to one another and to share and try to jump right to doing what we might say is the work of campaigns, it always comes back on us. And so it's a constant process. Undoing racism is a constant process. Learning about one another's communities is it's a cyclical, iterative experience.
Yeah, it's the changing constant, and finding common ground, I think, is as you know, being an organizer, that's the first place to start with relationships. Thank you both for a great discussion. I would like to introduce our third panelist now. I have the honor of introducing the Rev Kenneth Glasgow, who is the founder and president of the Ordinary People Society, which is called T.O.P.S. T.O.P.S provides rehabilitation and restoration to repeat offenders while creating a program that targets youth before they reach the criminal justice system. He is the convener and co-convener of the National Criminal Justice Coalition and co-chairman of formerly incarcerated and convicted people movement. He has been instrumental in registering over 80,000 ex-felons to vote in the state of Alabama. He is the first and only formerly incarcerated person to win a lawsuit that allowed convicted felons to keep their voting rights, whether incarcerated or not. And with that, thank you so much for being here with us, and I will turn it over to you, sir.
How you doing? First of all, thank everybody that's on here. I see a lot of friends, a lot of people I've been working with, and I just want to give y'all your props, and please give yourself a hand, because I know y'all bear the scars of the battle just as I do, so thank you so much. Thank y'all for the opportunity and all, but what I want to talk about is what's going on in the rural community. So I look at it from three different phases. And the first phase would be, what all have we done? Well, in T.O.P.S, we've done a lot of different things in Alabama. We got approximately now, as of this year, we just got 14 amendments that just went in. We've done it in a coalition group type effort, of course, but that makes us being responsible and influential in getting 14 different laws passed. Here in Alabama alone, we got 2 laws passed in Georgia pertaining to Southern Movement. Not Southern Movement, pertaining to special management units, that's solitary confinement in Georgia prisons, as well as the Open Records Act when it became necessary to sue them because they wasn't giving out information on what's happening with people in prisons and all. Very instrumental in 2007, getting the voters' rights passed in Florida as well, before we had the likes of Rick Scott, the new governor that came in, did his executive order, and changed everything. However, we were very influential last year with the help of Drug Policy Alliance to come in and help us in finding out that Rick Scott's wife was actually the one that owned the company that he was going to use for testing the people on drugs to stop them from getting TANF and all that, and testing all the people on TANF and all. So we've been doing a lot of great work here in the South, Georgia, Florida, and Alabama, and more especially. But in doing so, what we have encountered is that a lot of our work, if it had not been for Drug Policy Alliance, people like Latasha Brown and others, Southern Partners Fund and all, in Project South, it would have never gotten out. One of the things that the second part I want to go into is one of the things that we have seen is that, you know, a lot of things that's happening in the rural communities, just as was spoken earlier, a lot of things, the accomplishments that we are making, a lot of strides and great work that is being done is not being highlighted and is not being known nationally. People are not even realizing that one of the biggest problems that we have in the South is, you know, a lot of people, I don't know if funders feel like this or not, but a lot of people feel like they can't get work done in the South, which is not true. You have a lot of us that are doing this work in rural areas, and it's really getting done. Right now, I don't know if any of y'all been paying attention what's happening with Dothan, Alabama, and especially what just happened with Varla. We got national attention on the police shooting and what's happening with drug being placed in people's pockets and all they're saying. But what it did was open up an avenue for us as advocates here, mainly myself, to design a community-led program that's going to keep the city government accountable and transparent. So these are the things that we're doing in a whole lot of different capacities. I don't know how much time I have. I'm just doing things really, really short. We feed about 300 people a day right here in Dothan, Alabama. 100 of those people are kids, and we use that as an avenue. I hate to say use, but for lack of better words, we use that as an avenue to get assessment forms of each and every one of these people, to get them in GED programs, to get them into parenting classes, do our M&M mentoring and monitoring and all that, and also to mobilize. So while we have them in these different classes and these different things and that they need to teach them life skills, job skills, and all that, we also teach them how to mobilize and organize them in such a way to have them learn, okay, do you know what's going on with your right to vote? Do you know what's going on? Because most of these are people that have been incarcerated or people that have incarcerated loved ones or single moms who got the fathers of the child are incarcerated, this and that and the other. And so it gives us the avenue to teach them, to organize them, so when we do our marches, when we do our civil disobedience, when we need to go up there to the Capitol in Montgomery and all, we already have the people to put in place who are the directly impacted. One of the biggest fallacies in here that I've been seeing across the years, and I think Drug Policy Alliance and Latasha Brown and all those folks that's been doing it, they have been making open doors in order to get those who are really, really directly impacted, lost ones, I should say. And when I say the lost ones, there's people who are lost. When we talk about us being the formerly incarcerated and convicted people, the lost ones are the family. You know, my mother almost lost her life and had cancer and all that when I went to prison, and, you know, and it just worried her to death. The lost ones are the kids who never see their father, and we have to do Christmas. We serve about 450 children of incarcerated parents, getting them bikes, this and that and the other, and we don't tell them that it comes from us. We have the people who get the children off the angel tree, right, to come and meet them at 12 o'clock on Christmas Eve and give them the gifts themselves and tell them, your father told me to give this to you.
Wow.
I'm trying not to cry right now.
Yeah.
But and when we do that, even though the kids don't know their dad, do you know how it makes them feel? At the same time as doing that, it's bringing rich white folks down to the bottom. The bottom is one of the most black, congested, drug-infested areas you ever want to imagine in any city. and these rich white folks come to the bottom, and you'll see a 2-year-old, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, 2-year-old young girl giving toys to a 3- and 4-year-old child with an afro. And me and the mayor and me and other people sit there and cry. I'm in the most conservative area it is across the country. There's some of the other people who have spoken earlier telling you. And we're getting this done. One of the biggest fallacies beyond that is that there's no reason to fund us or can't get nothing done, and you're funding that. And we're doing this, you know, and without any funds, then could you imagine what we could do with some? When we did the ex-felon voters' rights before we changed the language, you know, from ex-felons, ex-convicts, and then inmates and all, before we changed the language of formerly incarcerated people with the Department of Justice, because I'm also part of that Super 8 that goes to the Department of Justice every 3 months and have a sit-down with the reentry interagency council, and that's all the Department of Justice heads. We meet with all 41 of them sometimes less. And then we have conference calls with them. They have actually changed their language on their website from calling us ex-felons, ex-cons, and this and that and other. But when we started this, me, LaTosha Brown, the late Paul Robertson and all, we actually got on vans and rode around this state of Alabama and registered people. To this day, I got a lawsuit in 2008, first one ever. People could vote out of prison. People can actually vote out of prison in Alabama because of this lawsuit. However, because of the lack of funding, because of the lack of national outlay, except for what's been happening with Drug Policy Alliance and their media team and all that, a lot of people don't even know they still have these rights. Right now, I'm on the Reentry Council for the state of Alabama with the Secretary of State, and his statement was very vital. Everybody asked him, why are you bringing Kenneth Glasgow, the biggest advocate that sued the state, why are you bringing him to sit at the table with you? He said, because either we can hear him at the table or either we're going to hear him when he sues us. I think he's a wise man. So they come to us now for this type of advice, for us to give our spiel, and they're starting to learn. I'm talking about Republican people, conservatives are bringing us to the table for us to give them so they can hear it firsthand. But you all know the saying we got now in the South. If I sit there and talk to you for more than 5 minutes, you're picking my brain so you can pick my pocket. We have accomplished a whole lot of stuff here in the South, and I just particularly think it's overlooked. My last and final thing, if we are making all of this progress, looking at the mass incarceration, right now they just told me they got to give me 1,400 people out. We got about 600 or 700 out, and we're getting all this done. If we are making all this progress in the South, we have to look at anywhere else in this country. Other people, and I know a lot of y'all may not agree with what I'm going to say, it's easier in the North. It's easier in the Northeast. It's a whole lot easier over there in the West Coast. You know, but in the South, where it's the most conservative, we're dealing with red states. We're dealing with people that don't even want to hear nothing. And right now, I could tell you, even not only with mass incarceration are they changing their mind. We just got, for the first time, I'm going to run through it real quick, where they could, people that got drug charges could actually get the food stamps. First time people that got drug charges could get public housing. They could get TANF now. First time we got the parole board to where they're going to actually give a reason, an explanation in detail why they denied somebody parole. That's never happened in Alabama before. You know, so we got all this coming to a point to where people are being accountable law. We got a lot of attention down here. We just need some help. The work is already being done and it's rendered. You can look at it. You can see it. You can get with DPA, Drug Policy Alliance, find out. You get with the touch by all those and see what's going on. But as those folk earlier told you, we are being looked over and not seeing for the work we're getting done. I believe if someone was just to do an assessment and a research on the work that's being done in the South at all, because as it goes in the South, it goes in the nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I have questions for you, but I'm going to hold off on those until we get our next speaker to share her to share her thoughts. So now we will have our final panelist, who is Asha Banfield. She is the Drug Policy Alliance's Senior Director of Grants, Partnerships, and Special Projects, and joined the organization in 2005. She built and continues to manage the Drug Policy Alliance's grant programs, which support grassroots organizations by providing financial and intellectual resources, while regularly engaging a wide array of audiences in public conversations about drugs and drug policy. She is a prolific writer, and in 2016, Scribner will re-release her 2003 novel titled Daughter, about the impact of police violence on one Brooklyn family, with the updated electronic version, which includes advice on healing from the founders of Black Lives Matter, Harry Belafonte, Michelle Alexander, Kadiatu Diallo, and numerous other incredible scholars. Welcome, Asha.
Thank you so much, Niki, and also thank you to Ben, who's shepherding us through this, and to all the people at NCRP, and thank you to Pastor Glasgow and all of the speakers for the incredible things that they have said. I feel a little out of place trying to speak after these extraordinary advocates, so I appreciate you having me.
It's a pleasure. Okay, so Asha, I'll ask you a few questions, and then we can maybe open it up for all four of you. But for now, I'm going to ask questions of you and the Reverend. So, could you give our listeners some information, background on why the Drug Policy Alliance supports Reverend Glasgow and T.O.P.'s work?
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to talk about that. And first, let me take a step back and say that the Drug Policy Alliance is an advocacy organization working to end the drug war and all its many tentacles, not the least of which is mass incarceration and mass criminalization, but also harm reduction, marijuana legalization as well. But what I want to say about us is that, you know, while we work to change laws and work to change people's hearts and minds, we also know that we cannot do it alone. And so to that extent, in 2005, when I joined, I was asked to build out a grants program where we could support the most effective organizers around the country who are boots on the ground, getting out there, doing the kind of work that Pastor Glasgow talked about in terms of restoring people's voting rights and all the other many things that he's been doing over these many years, that he's been one of our closest partners, which is now as we're going into our 11th or 12th season together. So it's different, you know, than I would say a traditional granting organization where folks have like sort of several large pools of funding dollars to meet, you know, whatever the organization's priorities are. With us, we work very closely. We don't call the people we fund grantees. We call them partners. We believe in doing the campaigns together. So it's not just a question of providing financial resources directly out of our general operating funds. We give away about $1 million out of our general operating funds every year, but it's also a question of providing intellectual resources, meaning that we understand that we're sort of a big organization. We have access to folks that many may not have access to, so we try to bring those folks to phone calls we do, webinars we do like this, and monthly gatherings we have with our partners on the phone, and once a year we bring them all together so they can network and build with each other. So we don't become the only point of entry for folks doing this work, that they know what each other is doing, and I'll tell you how important that is. I can remember when Ban the Box was first being talked about as a possibility. It was probably in 2 jurisdictions, in Boston and in Chicago, and Dorsey Nunn heard wind of it out in San Francisco. And we were all, I remember us all sitting in a meeting in Berkeley back in 2006, and, you know, him saying, you know, we can do this in San Francisco, and before you know it, it started to sweep the nation, because organizers were sitting there together, and they didn't have to reinvent the wheel. They had a toolkit of how to do this. And, of course, you know, you even have it now at the federal, at the presidential level, saying that we ought to ban the box. So we believe very much in the importance of ensuring that people have the ability to to speak face-to-face and work face-to-face with those who look, sound, and are doing the work just like they are. And it's a way to grow, and that's part of the advocacy we do. So in that way, we do differ from other granting organizations. But what we're deeply committed to is to ensuring that what one of our partners says, that it's, you know, nothing about us without us. And so if we're going to stand and speak about mass incarceration, mass criminalization, then we're going to do so standing shoulder to shoulder, linking arms and aims to the people who have been incarcerated and their families. If we are going to talk about people who are struggling with drug addiction and the consequences of drug addiction that usually are worse from the state than they are from anything else, then we're going to do so with active drug users standing beside us. So that's how we approach our work. That's how I've tried to approach my work these last 10.5 years with DPA. And, you know, I'm very proud of the work we do, but prouder still of the work that our partners like T.O.P.S does, because they've just been a leader. Alabama is one of the hardest states to work in. There's very little money that goes into the South at all and into rural communities at all. As Pastor Glasgow was tearing up talking about, you know, the bike giveaway, so too was I. Because I know what it takes to do that every year. I know what it means to have a child who has a parent in prison, and to what it takes to keep that parent alive in that child's eyes. And so the work that he does is not just transformational, it's life-saving. And that's what's happening in rural communities across the nation, and we need to honor that in every way we can, not just with financial resources, although that's a very good place to start, but also with our own intellectual property access, resources. We have to stop being gatekeepers. That's how we believe, and that's how we try to live and do our work each day.
Thank you. I'd like to ask you as a follow-up to what you just said, why is it that you think that so little monies for criminal justice reform from institutional philanthropy end up in rural areas?
You know, it's a hard question to answer because it forces me to be in a position of speaking to people's intentions. And I can't speak to people's intentions or hearts, but I can say what I suspect, and that's all what, you know, that we're going to do between you and me and whoever's on this private webinar. I mean, I suspect that what people want to do is, all people want to do. They want to look for legacy and glory, and so they want to do stuff where they're going to get the biggest bounce for being attached to a project, right? So much of the work that's done to save human beings is done outside of the light. It's done without the TV cameras there. It's done without the New York Times being there to cover it. It's just done outside of the light. And so, and what people like to do is they tend to fund those things that are often in front of the light, which often are very good, but sometimes they're no more than sort of the cotton candy of organizing, the fluff of it, right? You get the cameras there, maybe a big name, and then you go away and nothing qualitative changes in the lives of the people they serve. And the other thing is that I think a lot of times people who are working in this business are somewhat, maybe at the highest levels. You know, I don't think it's just true of everybody. Certainly, I'm not painting this with a broad brush, but I have certainly experienced where there are people who are doing this work who are not doing it because they know something with their heart, right? They don't have and have not incorporated the real lived experiences of people who day to day are living with the multiple traumas that are visited upon American citizens living in, in what's effectively an incarceration nation and what's effectively a white supremacist nation that terrorizes people quite often. They're not as close to that, and I don't know that they feel the urgency of saving that life, right? So that, they don't act.
Right. I think that's something I'd actually love for each of the panelists to speak a little bit more to, is what do you think foundations need in order to fill that knowledge gap about the work that's going on?
Hey, this is Nick Szuberla. Well, I think one is, listening to Reverend Glasgow and having visited him numerous times, I do think site visits where you go and see the work, see the community context, and that. So if there's a group in the past where I've seen progressive funders help figure out how to get into the South or into rural communities, it's been because someone has really organized a field trip that links with current folks that are there, like small funders like the Appalachian Community Fund or initiatives that are going. So I think that's one. I think that on our side, we need to present and talk about the work that's happening, talk about the larger issues involved in how we're building base, how we're building community power, and that like what the goals are there. So I think it's a two-way street.
Right.
This Pastor Glasgow, I also agree with what Nick said, but also we need to let them know and they need to see the leadership, the capacity building, all the development and the support that people have gotten around here in the South. Because in the South, I've always told everybody, and I think Jagpal Alani, people like Latasha Brown, people that's from the South like her and Jagpal Alani have been the only ones that's listening. In the South, our resources down here, we haven't had the funds. Our resources down here has been the relationships. And even though I could go and fight the DA, guess what? On a personal level, I could go to the DA and say, hey, I'm going to help your son get off drugs. You know, I need you to repass this bill or let these people go. You know, you could, and let me give you a perfect example. So in New York or somewhere else, you could go in the back room, make deals, pass money around, okay? The deal is done. My brother do it every day. In Alabama, Georgia, Florida, in the South, you know, you could go in there and pass all the money you want. You know, give out some tickets to Guatemala Bay, to Guala, whatever. You know, and they will say, hey, okay, we got you. But then his brothers, sisters, cousins, nephews, cousins, sisters, uncle's brother on his wife's side, you know, some real distant, extended family, and say, no, I don't like it. And no matter how much money you gave them, it don't happen. Because they have to deal with the relationships.
I want to add to that, too. Thank you for that, Pastor Glasgow and Nick. I want to say, too, you know, and I use the term white supremacy here intentionally. You know, I think that there are a lot of folks of good hearts and good intentions who have yet to learn how to shift their listening, right? We talk a lot about people who are struggling and rarely talk to them and listen to them in a language that they are comfortable speaking in. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard something so eloquently and beautifully said that was dismissed by others in the room because it wasn't said in the same language we're used to hearing when we study the problems of the world in whatever our fancy institutions are that we studied them in. So we don't even hear really what the problem is. We always expect the people, we expect if you're living in the rural South, if you want to get money from a foundation that may be situated in the North, right, that you have to do everything in the same cultural context and way and manner and delivery as they do. And that may not be true. You may not be able to do that. You may have another way of delivering the information, another way of speaking truth to power, and we don't hear it in the same way. And so I think that there's a sharp learning curve, a growing edge that has to happen by many who sit in the highest places in the philanthropic world to listen with new ears, to listen with a more open heart, to be open to different ways of doing things and executing things. As the Native American brother was saying, we have different ways of getting to the solution. And it may not be written or spoken or laid out in the same way as you. It may not even come in a language that people understand. But half the time, the things that they say in some of these philanthropic meetings, and I went to Columbia, half the time I don't know what they're talking about, right? So there's got to be some ability to marry these two and a willingness for those who are sitting in a lot of these Northeastern foundations to step out of their comfort zone and into perhaps the discomfort of where other people are living, because that's what other folks are asked to do all the time. I'm always asked to change the way that I speak, present, dress, and live my life in order to be acceptable in these rooms. And it's time, I think, for a little role reversal.
Absolutely. And let me say this Pastor Glasgow one more time, and I'm going to end it. And let me say this. Latasha Brown and Asha has been interpreting for me for years. okay? Because I talk in this real down-to-earth way like, look, man, you know, I could go up in here and get with these doggone legislators, right? That's the black legislators, and I can get this thing done, you feel what I'm saying? But I got to get it done, and I just kill it, you know, once I present it to my people on out there in the streets, and they get that thing wrapped up around now, and then we get up in them things, and we ride down there to that Capitol, right? And we cap that thing off, and we get it done. Now, what I just really said is it's important to realize that the importance of rural America as a breeding ground for reactionaries and anti-progressive policies, to address this, you must start where it originates, and that's in the South. That's in the streets. The South is ripe for investment. Many of the states in the South that are having budget problems are now forced to look at the budget in their implications. If we had the money, we could take advantage of these opportunities. But see, Asha and Latasha have to interpret that's what the hell Kenny just said.
All right,
and I think that it would be ever more effective, and I'll close with this thing. I think it would be ever more effective to not have an interpreter standing in the middle. It's a very uncomfortable role for anybody who's a child of somebody who's just come here who doesn't speak for their parents. I know a lot of people like that. That is a very uncomfortable role to be in, because it almost makes you look like you're the important one, when in fact you're not the one who's even doing the work. And so I would.
Asha, I think we just lost your audio.
I think we lost Asha. And Asha, I don't know how frank we could be on here. I don't know who was on here or whatever. So I won't go into detail about it because I don't want to cause no friction. But it's even a point to where funders wouldn't even fund us for the formerly incarcerated convicted people movement in 2011. And we had the bridge, the Selma Bridge. They gave us the whole bridge. We had everything, the mayor out there, the attorney, everybody was ready. We had to go to Jagpal Alliance and get funding. Latasha tried to go get as much funding as we can, and the funders were like, no, it's not time yet. But yes, it was time. And look what ended up happening. A whole bunch of greatness come out of that. And I'm done with that.
All right, thank you. And I would like to just turn to Lenny again, if you have any closing thoughts you'd like to share or other issues that came up during this great discussion that you'd like to highlight.
Who did you call on?
Lenny.
Oh, okay. I just want to thank you, first of all, for allowing me to participate in this important panel. And I appreciate the honesty expressed by my brother there, talking about the rural South. And I'm sure we all feel very strong about our environment where we live. I live on an Indian reservation, so I agree with what you're saying. It's very difficult sometimes to even be invited to the table to have our input. I find that true when I go to Santa Fe, New Mexico, or to Phoenix, Arizona, or to Salt Lake City or Denver, even Washington, D.C., to be heard. And I think funding is a start in allowing us to do our work and not to have any indifference or interference with our direct services. And hopefully that's where we're leading to, because we stand on our issues and our accomplishments and what we hope to achieve, and it takes funding to allow us to carry out these activities. So I appreciate the words that have been expressed by all, and I'm sure we all believe in what we're saying. Likewise for myself, being from the Navajo Indian reservation, it's an isolated rural area, so we constantly have to fight for our rights. And mentioned earlier by the facilitators, we stand very strong with our sovereign rights and our treaty rights, and we want to do the work that's necessary to provide a healing and a wellness, and that involves traveling to these facilities that are not near any reservations. So when you're talking about rural areas not being able to get this respect we stand with that those issues too. We feel that right now in Arizona we have a state government that's completely out of control in mass incarceration of Native Americans. And really the bottom line is if they can get all the young men and women off the reservation incarcerated, they have an easier time of taking over what's remaining of the land and the resources. So I feel that there's an agenda. Well, we recognize this agenda that's being done by the officials who many times don't even come from this area. They relocate to Arizona and the Southwest from other areas of the country. They bring their racism and their prejudice with them. So we have to combat that. So again, I'd like to thank you for your words, your honesty, and sharing that, and allowing me to express my feelings too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And this has been a really rich discussion, and with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ben.
Yes, we just want to give another thank you to all of our panelists and all of you listening today. This is a conversation that we don't have often enough and don't have, frankly, often enough. So we're really happy to be able to have this conversation together, and we really appreciate the panelists for their candor and their time and all of your time as well. I just wanted to close with this list of resources. We'll be sending out the slides and the link to this recording in a few days. But we want to let you all know that you can use the slides and our resources on our website as a resource. And we hope that you all see this conversation today as really the start of a conversation. So check out these resources, have conversations with your peers, and engage with us. And we'll hope to work with you again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Go on in. Yeah.